are here at the Property Investor Show Spring Edition at London Excel. There's a real landlord buzz in the background, and we've come along to the Refundee stand, and I am with co-founder Stuart. And Stuart, you know that I'm a big fan of what you do, and I do a little bit of consultancy work with Refundee, but it's your first time at the show. How are you finding it?
It's been brilliant. It was a bit of an unknown. It's the first time we've ever done anything like this. So thank you for the introduction. There's been a lot of people speaking to us, there's been a lot of interest. We've actually spoken to a few existing customers, and we thought it'd all be about property here, but we've had people speaking to us about all sorts of things that they've been through. So yeah, it's been great for us so far.
So tell us, just in a nutshell, what is the service that Refundee offers?
So we help people get their money back when they've been a victim of fraud. Usually it's bank transfer fraud, and what we look at is your bank's obligations to, first of all, protect you from fraud and also reimburse you when you've lost money to fraud. So the reason we're here at the Property Investor Conference is because we quite often see, sometimes it's borderline, but sometimes we see basically Ponzi schemes and frauds that are taking place, and we see people go to their banks and report it to their banks and ask for a refund, and then we see the banks telling them that it's a civil matter or it's just a failed investment. And so we spend our time proving that it's a scam, and therefore making people eligible for the contingent reimbursement model code, which is the code that a lot of the banks have signed up to.
Well, you indicated there that people can make the claim themselves, but you specialise in it, and you have a forensic investigators and people that dig very, very deep into how the whole thing was set up, and if there's any evidence of fraudulent or unscrupulous activity. So quite often you get quite large groups of people coming together, particularly if it's, say, a failed off-plan development, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, people can do it themselves, and in theory it should be as simple as calling up your bank, telling them what's happened, and then they say, okay, this is fraud, what checks did you do a bit of investigation, and then make a decision on reimbursing you. But what we frequently see is, instead of that, the banks will say, sorry, nothing to do with us, this is a civil matter, go report it to trading standards or something like that. So for us, sometimes it's actually really easy. It's just really obvious that something is a fraud. Sometimes it requires a lot of work to, you have to trawl through accounts, trawl through company's house, research the history of the directors, all these kind of things, just to dig into whether it's actually fraud or not. Usually it is, to be honest. When people are really suspicious, they're suspicious for a reason. Yeah,
well, indeed. And I was so pleased to learn about what you do, because obviously, as you know, I do a lot of consumer protection work in the sector, because large swathes of things that come under the property investment umbrella are totally unregulated, and unfortunately that does attract rogues, and it does ultimately result in quite significant consumer losses. So to my mind, it's wonderful that you have this service that is a form of redress for somebody, because there are so few forms of redress.
Yeah, I mean, prevention's obviously much better, because it's horrible to go through this kind of thing, and it takes 6 months to a year through this process to try and get your money back, and not everybody succeeds. So it's really nice when you do get people's money back, but obviously that's not always the case. Sometimes people do lose it, and sometimes it's just on really unfortunate technicalities as well.
But you work on a no-win, no-fee basis, so people haven't got anything to lose from coming to you and seeing if you, with all your in-depth experience and background and in banking and all of that kind of thing, that whether you can actually show the bank that it was a fraudulent transaction.
I mean, we're no-win, no-fee exactly, and when people speak to us, one of the first things they get told straight up front is how to do it themselves if they want to, and obviously that's free. With Refundee, it's no-win, no-fee. If they succeed, we charge 15% of whatever they get back plus VAT, but that is subject to a cap of £10,000 plus VAT. So the most people will pay for their case is £12,000 for people that have lost more money, which unfortunately, when it comes to investments, people frequently do lose lots of money. We've actually got customers who have lost more than £1 million.
Really?
This kind of thing.
Wow, that's shocking. Now we know that there's a lot of fraudulent activity that goes off in off-plan investments. It's quite interesting because since I've been working with you and we've been having our regular conversations about the sort of cases that are coming through to you, we're seeing a lot more of rent-to-rent and rent-to-rent deals that have gone wrong. So it kind of seems like a trend.
We've actually just won in the last couple of weeks a big rent-to-rent fraud. So where there was a big provider that pretended that they had contracts with a well-known social housing provider and housing association. It was all completely fake. We went through all the customer contracts and saw that people were reportedly renting the same properties. It's very difficult for people to expose in advance. But we are seeing an increase in rent-to-rent, particularly when people say they've got contracts with, housing associations, councils, and things like that. And we have seen cases where people have forged the contracts as well. So they send investors, this is our contract with that provider, but the contract's completely fake. So in that kind of situation, if you're approached with that kind of thing, I would always find out who the social housing provider is and contact them directly and see whether that relationship actually exists.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because right now on Facebook and social media, there are thousands of these social housing investments. I've seen one offering 60% returns.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a red flag. And we help with all kinds of scams. It's not just property. We help with crypto investments, job scams, all these different things. And one pattern we see is a lot of stuff starts on Facebook.
And offers unrealistically high returns.
Exactly.
Very big red flag.
And one thing I would say while we're on camera as well is one of the things that's most convincing about all of these ones we see is the early investors get paid their returns, and sometimes they get their returns for years, and that's what makes people trust it. And I would urge people that alone, if you've got a friend who's been getting returns for a while, that in itself is not due diligence. You need to do a lot more than that. Like I said, it depends on what's happened, but you need to find out exactly what you're investing in. Make sure they actually own the land they say they own. Make sure your money's actually going to where they say it's going. If they say they've got a contract with another party, check with that other party and see whether it exists. Definitely don't just rely on the fact they're paying people already, because the nature of how a Ponzi scheme works is that the early investors do get paid.
Exactly that. Well, I'm very glad to see you here at the Property Investor Show. I'm so glad that your service is there for consumers that have lost money to some fraudulent activity. And just remind us, as we close this out, Stuart, fraud is actually a very simple definition, isn't it? Fraud's a pretty simple definition. What I would say that things have evolved at the Ombudsman Service. The definition of an APP scam, which is where we can help people, it's basically push payment fraud when you send money via bank transfer. There's a specific definition. It's basically if you send money for something that you believe is legitimate and it turns out to be fraudulent, then you're covered. In terms of what is fraud, the actual payment has to kind of be fraudulent. So really, it's basically a legal definition of what fraud is. So if somebody's made a claim of something, it turns out to be false, misleading, and they ought to have, it's kind of beyond doubt they knew it was false and misleading, and it causes you financial loss or gain to them, then it's likely to meet the definition. But that doesn't necessarily mean you get reimbursed on the code. There's a little bit more to it than that. It has got a little bit more complicated, unfortunately. Yeah, well, I'm sure the banks are pushing back on it.
Exactly. There's a lot.
You've had a couple of test cases with property educators as well that you're looking at as well, where people signed up for really expensive property education and then realised that it actually wasn't viable.
So we have some test cases on that. They've not got to the end of the process yet. They're traditionally very difficult to prove the fraudulent intent, which is what we kind of need to do. And because there has been some kind of service delivered, it's like, the argument the banks will put forward is you basically just signed up to a bad course rather than a fraud. But we know that the intent of some of these, not most, but some of the people that are doing it, we know their intent is never to deliver a proper course. And sometimes they actually use the courses to refer people to some of the actual proper frauds that we've seen. So they give them a poor level of training and say, oh well, you can't do it yourself. why don't you invest in this person or this company, and then that turns out to be a fraud sometimes.
Yeah. So we said that obviously prevention is better than cure. You work in the cure area, but we can just remind people to, if they do pay by bank transfer or indeed via their credit card, there is a potential route of redress via that method, isn't there?
And I'd also check that your bank is signed up to the contingent reimbursement model, because not all banks are. So if you've got a business account with Tide, for example, they're not signed up. Revolut are not signed up. Wise are not signed up. So if you send money from those, it makes it much harder to get your money back if it does turn out to be fraud. All the major high street banks are signed up to the code.
Okay, good.
So yeah.
Well, you're a mine of knowledge. I've got so many more questions, but I'm mindful of the time.
Yeah.
So good to see Stuart and Refundee here at the Property Investor Show. You've already had some really good conversations, and not just about property, crypto as well, etc. So anybody that feels that they've lost any money in a consumer transaction and it could be fraud, then here's the man to get in touch with. I'll put the details underneath the video. Good luck, Stuart, with everything. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. You too.